Good afternoon and welcome to today's Ask the Gardener here on the Irish Gardener on Facebook. This is where I do my little bit to help us all stay a bit sane by answering your gardening questions during this lockdown period. And in particular, I'm here to help those of us who have just developed the love of gardening over the last 12 months, because it's one of the real positives, if not maybe the only positive, to have come from the last 12 months during this period of lockdown is people's deeper appreciation and love for gardening, and the amount of new gardeners that have found the joy that is to be had. Now later on I will be revealing the winner of our big competition. If you remember, I launched a competition last week for some gift cards for the Irish Gardener store. I asked you to send photographs into my Facebook page. Lots of you did. I narrowed it down to 8, and we can announce the winner today. I'll be calling him or her in a while. Now, before I start answering the questions, I want to just walk you through planting some lily of the valley roots and iris roots, because I've had a lot of questions during the week from people wondering, who bought them from my own store and in other places, but just wondering how they should plant bare root perennials. So I'll just show you in this camera here. This is how this is Iris Blue King, this is how it will arrive in a brown paper bag. And it's just a bare root plant, so as the name suggests, the roots are exposed, they're not grown in a pot. So I was going to say it's pretty obvious, but just in case it's not pretty obvious, these green bits are the shoots. That's what's going to form the plant with the lovely flowers in the springtime, in the summertime, and these are the roots. So if you have a pot, half fill it with compost like this, okay? Half fill it with compost. Any good quality compost will do you, or even your own homemade compost. So you want to get the roots into that, right? Just down like that. And see these shoots here, see the white bits? They're etiolated because they haven't seen sunlight. So you want to kind of half bury them. So I'll show you what I mean, okay? So there we go, half bury them. So they're just popping up through the soil surface, okay? Now, just looking to see, I thought I had another pot full of compost there, but I don't. So the lily of the valleys, which again will come to you like that in a brown paper bag. Everything in the packaging, if you're getting it from my store, can just be put in the compost bin. There's no recycling, no landfill, nothing like that, just into the compost bin. So again, they come like that, and I'm just going to take the iris out for a second, just to show you. It's exactly the same process. Just taking the iris out, leave it there, and I'll repot it in a minute. So you've a couple of lily of the valley roots there. So again, you can see that's the shoot. Now it's going sideways, it's going down, it's pointing down, but we want to get the roots into the ground, okay? Into the soil, in like that. So the top of it is just above the soil surface. The same with this little fella. You get 2 or 3 of them into the pot. There's 3 in each packet. Okay, so just, there we go. So it's just poking above the soil surface. Give them a drop of water and off you go. Here's the third one. Sorry, I knew there was supposed to be 3. So I'm going to put the third one in there as well. Just a bit of soil then around the top of it. So you can just see the little shoots just emerging through the top of the pot full of soil. You can have them outside, even with the frost that we're getting or that's forecast to come over the next few nights. They'll be fine outside. You could also plant them directly into the ground if you want. You don't have to start them in pots, but with some of them I find it a bit easier to start them off in pots and then plant them into the soil. As I say, in terms of the frost that's coming this weekend, they should be fine. But if you're a bit nervous, why not keep them in the shed or in the greenhouse, or even in your kitchen windowsill, just for the next few days when the temperatures are forecast to dip. But I imagine they'll be fine with the perennials. Okay, so before I deal with the live questions, I want to just deal with a few questions that have come in during the week. Now do, of course, post your questions in the comments below here, and I'll get to as many as I can today. And those that I don't get to, we'll do our best to get to them next week. So, question here from Breda. It's a long one, so bear with me. Hi Peter, what in your opinion would be the best climber, preferably evergreen, to grow in a large pot on the north side of my house with no direct sunlight? You'll see the picture there. This is an awkward dark area. Mostly in the shade, might get an hour or so of early morning sunlight. Don't think it gets much in the evening. I have a honeysuckle, Lonicera henryi, that I was going to attempt putting into a narrow, deep trough like a pot. I don't want a big round pot, as it'll take up all the path room. And I agree, Breda, it'll totally obstruct that path. I don't want a big round pot. Or will I have to resign to an artificial plant? Breda, I can't believe you even asked me that question. We absolutely frown on plastic plants, artificial plants. So no, don't go down, pardon the pun, but don't go down the route of an artificial plant. Do try and get something to grow. I would rather look, personally, I'd rather look at the concrete panel than a plastic plant. But anyway, I think a long rectangular trough, like you're saying, is probably the way to go for that area. Best one for very low light levels, I would say, would be the climbing hydrangea. It's a plant called Hydrangea petiolaris. Bit of a mouthful of a name, but it's also called the cobweb plant. It's like very lace-capped flowers. It covers the wall with these lace-capped flowers, which gives the effect, if you like, of a plant that's covered in cobwebs. Very easy to grow. It will do well in a pot like that. Big, long rectangular trough. So as you say, you can walk past it. Another good one for the shade is the good old-fashioned ivy. That'll do well in a very shady area as well. What you could do if you wanted is try two. Now, not both in the same pot, because the hydrangea or the ivy will need all the nutrients and all the soil that one pot will give them. But you could try one on either side, maybe like one on either end of it, if you know what I mean. And in time, they might even grow in together. If you do that, they're both self-clinging, which is ideal for that area because it's concrete. But what you'll have is you'll have evergreen foliage with the ivy, and then you'll have lots of lovely flower from the hydrangea. But the other thing about the climbing hydrangea, and for me I think it's probably the main feature of the climbing hydrangea, is the autumn colour. You get lovely butter yellow autumn colour. But then of course when that drops it's bare. So it might be nice to have the ivy, as I say, to complement it, because that will be there during the winter. But they're two that'll do well in a shady area. Now, Francis sent me in a question. I have planted a beech hedge, approximately 65 metres long. It's my favourite of all, Francis. I love the beech hedge. I love the coppery look it gives us in the winter. It really follows the seasons. I plan on laying cardboard underneath, covered with a layer of mulch to keep weeds under control as it establishes. This is a great idea, brilliant idea, because obviously if you can control, you're not putting that horrible plastic down, you're putting cardboard down, which will disintegrate, the worms will feed on it. And by the time it's disintegrated, hopefully weeds aren't a problem because the hedge will be established. So by controlling the weeds under the hedge, you really are going to help that hedge, because the reason I would say 9 out of 10 hedges don't do well in their first years is quite simply lack of water. It's as simple as that. It makes us gardeners look good that we know what we're talking about, try this, try that, but actually it's normally just lack of water. So, but what competes with the hedge for water is just weeds, believe it or not, and grass around the surface. So if you can imagine a new plant has gone into the ground, the rain falls onto the soil. Well, what gets the water first? The roots of the weeds. So the water doesn't even go down to the hedge. So putting down a mulch to stop the weeds from growing and competing is a brilliant thing to do to help it establish. Using cardboard with an organic material on top is brilliant. Now, Francis goes on to say, I can get a trailer load of Leylandii mulch, but my gut is telling me it's not a good idea to use this species as a mulch due to its toxicity. Can you offer any thoughts? You're right to be concerned, Francis. So the Leyland, which is your conifer, your big conifer hedge, I think I had a picture there of that's the beech hedge. That's not Francis' beech hedge yet, but I'm confident that that's what Francis's will look like in a few years' time. That's a lovely established beech hedge picture that I found. You're right to be concerned about the toxicity of the Leyland, because the sap and everything that will come out of that over the first 12 months as it's rotting down could in fact harm the beech, yes. But if it has been composted or allowed to compost and allowed to break down for, I would say, at least a year, then you should be safe to use it, Francis, but not fresh trimmings. So by all means use trimmings from any conifer, including the Leyland, but leave them break down first for a year or so, okay? Margaret then has also sent in a picture. Hi Peter, could you identify this daisy? It's from my mum's garden. I purchased loads but not managed to get this one. It gets bigger and bigger each year and seems to thrive on neglect. Oh, I see the picture there now, Margaret. That is, yes, I would say that's a plant called Anthemus cupiana. The lovely kind of ground cover daisy, kind of silvery ferny foliage, greeny silver, and these lovely masses of white flowers. And as you say, yes, it thrives on neglect. So have a Google, have a look at it. Anthemus cupiana, Anthemis. Try and find it in your local garden centre. You should be able to. If that's it, brilliant. If that's not the one you're talking about, maybe come back to me and send me a couple of different pictures. But I'd be pretty confident that's what that one is. Lovely plant to grow, actually. Now, Sharon, hi Peter. Can I plant my canna bulbs in pots now and leave them in the shed? I have also made a no-dig raised bed with peat-free compost. Do you think I can plant all my summer bedding and perennials directly into it? Well, yes, Sharon. Yes, you can plant your canna bulbs now, and I would In fact, referring to what I was talking about earlier in the piece, the temperatures are due to drop this weekend to as low as -4 in some parts of the country. So I would keep your canna bulbs, pot them now by all means, but keep them in the shed or the greenhouse or whatever, just until the temperatures begin to increase, probably only about another week or so, and then you can start moving them out, just paying attention to frost, any late frost that we might get. Because it's unusual to get harsh frost in April, but it's, I'm afraid, by no means unheard of. We do get them. We get them right up to May. I've also made a no-dig raised bed. Can I plant my summer bedding and perennials directly into it? Well, yes, Sharon, you can. Too early now for the same reason, too cold to plant summer bedding out. Far too early yet, another few weeks. They won't tolerate the low temperatures at all. But your perennials, like I was showing you there with the iris and lily of the valley and all the other perennials, they'll be fine to plant out straight away into that no-dig raised bed. The bedding would be fine to plant straight into that no-dig raised bed, but just a bit early. Then Liz has said, I am contacting you today about my hedging at home. I think it could be 60 plus years old, so it's a good established hedge. I noticed it has become diseased all over. I think it's gardenia hedge. Can I rescue it, or is it better to remove it and burn it? There's a picture of the hedge. There's another picture. Is there a picture of it? Yes, there we are, close up. That's Escalonia is what that one is, Liz. So it's an Escalonia hedge with a very bad infestation, as you can see, of Escalonia leaf spot. Now, it's not uncommon. It's been particularly prevalent in Ireland over the last number of years. It's a fungal infection. So what you need to do is kind of a four-pronged approach to this. As with any fungal infection, I always think the best first course of action is what we refer to as cultural control. Now, all that means is that you remove as much of the infected growth as is possible. Now, obviously, in a hedge like that, that's a lot of it. But do cut it back. Now, it's the wrong time of the year to cut back your hedge, because under the Wildlife Act, we're not allowed to cut them back until September because there could be birds nesting. So what I would do is wait till September, cut back that hedge. What you could do steps 2 and 3 if you like now, right? So step 2 is drench the whole hedge with copper sulfate, a solution of copper sulfate mixed with water. I think I have some here somewhere. It's my go-to in the shed, if you like. It's my go-to broad-spectrum organic fungicide. Mix that with water. Drench the hedge and the soil around it with that. As I say, it's a fungal infection affecting the Escalonia. This is a good organic broad spectrum and offers a wide spectrum of control. Drench the soil and the hedge with that, mixed with water. And then the third thing is step 3, if you like. Now, this will come after you've trimmed it back, but try and make sure you remove all infected growth from around the ground. Don't leave any trimmings with infection on it, because the spores that are in the leaves and in the stems will just go back into the soil, and it becomes, it keeps on going on and on and on. So try and hygiene, keep any trimmings and disease material away from the hedge. Treat it with the copper sulfate. Feed it with your Nature Safe, the good organic liquid seaweed. That's the Irish-made Nature Safe, good organic one. Feed it with that. It'll give it a great boost at this time of the year. And then, as I say, cut it back in September. I'm a bit all over the place with the answer, because if I was asked that question in February, I would say first thing to do is cut it back. Cut it back, treat it with the copper sulfate, feed it with the tonic, and remove all the material from around it. But because we can't cut the hedge back at this time of the year, and because it's such a heavy infestation, I would take action immediately with the copper sulfate and feed, and then prune it in September. I say the copper sulfate is a fine go-to fungicide to have, but that's not to say we use it willy-nilly. You don't use that every week or anything like it. Once, maybe twice a year. It's copper sulfate at the end of the day. We're putting it into the soil. Don't use too much of it. It's safe to use, but be careful. It's not something that you'd use all the time. Now, that was Liz. So I'm going to go to a few live questions that are coming in there now. I'm going to see one. I see one there. It's from Mary. Mary, hi, Peter. What is the best way to plant nerines? I've tried a number of times and they never grow for me. Well, Mary, one of these things that you're not going to hear. You're not going to like my answer, which is that they should be very easy to grow, unfortunately. But we all have a plant, and for me it's the rosemary, the herb rosemary. We all have a plant that most people find very, very easy to grow, but I can't. Now, I have managed to get rosemary established over the last few years, but I have found it difficult. And I think I'm laughing because nerines are obviously that plant for you, because they are relatively easy to grow. Plant the bulb. Now, with nerines, they're a bit different to most bulbs, in that most bulbs, I would say a good rule of thumb is to plant most bulbs twice their height under the ground. So for example, if a daffodil bulb is that high, you'd go twice it under the ground. So that's a few inches. But with the nerine, I wouldn't. With the nerine, I'd have nearly the top of the bulb showing. So maybe that's where you're going wrong, Marie. Maybe you've been planting them too deep in the past. I love the nerines. They give those lovely pink flowers at a great time of the year because it's later than when a lot of the other summer flowers are going over. The nerines are just starting. Fabulous flower. To plant them now, so maybe you've been planting them at the wrong time of the year too, that's possible. So you plant them really any time between kind of February and May. Just leave the top of the bulb showing. Position them somewhere. It doesn't have to be full sun, but they will do best in full sun. And as I say, a shallow soil with the top of the bulb showing. And cross your fingers, Marie, and hope for the best. Let me know how you get on. I expect to see pictures of lots of pink flowers later in the year. Now there's a question then from Margaret. Margaret, could you tell me how I could take a piece off a hedge in full bloom to grow elsewhere and how to replant it, probably in a tub? Thank you. Well, Margaret, that's a pretty broad question, I'm afraid, because not all hedges are equal. So it does depend on what hedge you're trying to grow. Some will root much, much easier than others. So a hedge in full bloom. Also, depending on what the hedge is, you normally grow cuttings like that, what's called internodal cuttings, semi-ripe internodal cuttings, to give them their posh name, a slip, if you like. But you do it later in the summer, so you do it on this year's growth. So when it's produced enough growth, 6 or 8 inches of growth, which is normally kind of June time, June onwards, cut at a node, so that the node is quite simply where the leaves meet the stem. That's the node. That's where all the magic happens in the stem, because that's where the auxins hang out. That's the hormone responsible for creating roots. So the node has to be the base of the cutting, Margaret. You want a cutting about 4 to 6 inches in length, depending again on the species of hedge. With box hedge, of course, it could be much, much shorter, but with most hedges, I would say 4 to 6 inches. So the base of the cutting is a node. The top of the cutting should also be a node. So if it is in full bloom, you don't want any of the flowers in the cutting, because you don't want any of the energy in that cutting to go into the flower. You want all the energy to go into developing roots, okay? So remove what we call the terminal bud, which is the bud up on top of the cutting, which could be a flower bud or a leaf bud. And leave just one pair of leaves on the cutting, into a bit of rooting powder, into some compost in a tub, as you say. Give it a bit of moisture, but not too wet. Do that in June onwards, and depending on the hedge, it should develop roots in a few weeks after that. Now then we have a question from Madeline. I saved cosmos seed last year. I planted them in pots about 2 weeks ago, but no growth in them. They're inside the house in a warm sunroom. Should I give them a bit longer and see if they start to grow? Well, I presume, Madeline, you don't say there, but I presume you've been kind of keeping them damp enough. You've been misting the soil, or that the compost was warm or damp enough to start with. The next point then is, and it's the most important word in any gardener's vocabulary, it's patience. I'm afraid 2 weeks isn't that long to wait for them to germinate. So certainly give them a few more weeks. Just make sure the soil is damp without being waterlogged. They'll germinate away if you don't worry. Just give it a bit of time. Then I have a question from Kathleen. Can you please explain fertilizer? There's so many. For example, tomato food, that's good for most fruit and veg, right? Okay, Kathleen, now this is, where do you start? So first of all, when it comes to fertilizer, I'm loath really to recommend fertilizer as such in the garden, because it's all about working with the soil and feeding the soil, as opposed to just putting on a fertilizer to feed the plant, okay? So if we have a good, healthy soil, most established plants won't need feeding. Okay, yeah, you heard me right. We don't need to feed most plants. A lot of that is just marketing speak. Now, to get plants established, it can often help to, like what I'm talking about there, is giving them a tonic with something like the Nature Safe if something's a bit sick, or to help something get established. So, starting at the start, if an established plant is growing in the right place, in the right soil, and if the soil is healthy, then it shouldn't need much in terms of fertilizer. So what we would use plant foods for, first of all, I would say do try and make sure it's an organic plant food, because we're putting things into the soil. We rely on the soil for everything. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I probably will. We rely on that 6 inches of magic that covers the planet that we call soil for everything. That's where the magic happens, right? We rely on it for all our food. We rely on it for all our medicines. We rely on it for life itself. Okay, so it's critical that what we put onto the soil is not damaging the soil. So please don't use chemical fertilizers or chemical weed killers if we can avoid it, and we can. So firstly, make sure that the plant food is organic. Tomato food, to get back to your question, is high in potassium and phosphorus. And potassium and phosphorus are nutrients that are key for the development of flowers and fruits. So obviously tomatoes and all fruits. So if you want to give a plant a tonic to promote flowers or fruiting, go for a good tomato food like the Nature Safe one, which is the one that I use because I find it excellent. It's Irish made and it's organic, okay? As a good general tonic, then you want something that's high in the main elements like your nitrogen, again, potassium and phosphorus, a good seaweed feed, that's the Nature Safe one, again, an organic one. There are other ones out there that's organic and they're Irish made and I like them and I use them. That's why I talk about them here. But so for a good general tonic, use a good seaweed feed. For fruit and flowers, use tomato feed. For lawns, then it does depend. It varies a bit. You want to, for good lawn, it's all about, again, the soil, maintaining good soil pH, maintaining good aeration. So scarify the lawn once a year. And then during this time of the year, when you want a lot of grass growth, you're looking at a kind of something that's high in nitrogen, a good feed, a feed that's high in nitrogen. And then later in the year, you want good root development. So again, it's back to potassium. Use something like the Lawn Gold range there. Again, it's an environmentally sound Irish-made range, so that's good. There are loads of other fertilizers that you can have or that are on the market. Being honest with you, if you have a good seaweed feed, if you have a good tomato feed, and if you have a good lawn feed, you have all bases covered. But as I say, an established plant, provided the soil is right and we have it growing in the correct conditions and position, it shouldn't need feeding. We only really need feeding maybe for our summer bedding and our summer perennials, a bit for the bulbs, and a bit to help the plants get established, or if the plant is sick. So it's a bit like ourselves. When I was talking about the fungal infection on the Escallonia earlier, I always regard treating it a bit like treating any infection on humans. So we would remove as much of the infection as possible. For example, if we got a cut in our hand and it got infected, remove as much of the infection as possible, treat the infection with some medicine, and then give ourselves a tonic to boost ourselves. So I think gardening is much the same in that we can, keep it organic and just try and maintain good plant health to prevent them getting sick in the first place. Hopefully that answers your question. Next question there I see coming up is from Maura. We have a laurel hedge with shothole, fungus and mildew. Please can you advise what action to take with it? Well, there's a lot going on there, Maura, but actually the same thing will do for all of it. So it's like the Escallonia hedge I mentioned earlier. Shothole, fungus and mildew, they're all fungal problems. So you see, it's very difficult. When I'm talking about cultural control, one of the things with cultural control is that you maintain good air circulation through the plant. Because when it's congested with poor air circulation, that's ideal conditions for fungal infections to develop. But in a hedge, of course, you can't really maintain good air circulation because you want a good dense hedge. So fungal problems are going to be more and more common, if you like, on hedges. So you can't have that good air circulation, but you can treat it with your copper sulfate. Again, broad spectrum organic fungicide, mix it with water it onto the hedge. Remove as much of the infected growth as possible by pruning. Again, don't cut your hedges back at this time of the year because it's illegal under the Wildlife Act to protect birds nesting and other wildlife nesting. So don't cut the hedge back. Treat it with your copper sulfate. If necessary, then if you think it's a bit hungry, give it the Nature Safe seaweed and it should be okay. Cut it back, as I say, in September. Don't cut it back at this time of the year. Now I have a question from Susan. I'm just starting with a polytunnel, hoping to grow tomatoes, peas, lettuce, onions, spring onions and potatoes. But I'm going to come over for dinner when restrictions allow, Susan. Sounds lovely. Is there anything that's good or to avoid planting close to each other in the same raised bed? Well, it's a good question, Susan, and not something we can deal with in depth here, but I'll touch on it for you. But there are, there's books dedicated to this, so do look into it. And in fact, Charles Dowding, who we spoke with here on the program a couple of weeks ago, have a look at some of his books because he gives great advice on what you can grow and can't grow with other plants. So tomatoes, just bear in mind, tomatoes don't grow them anywhere near potatoes because they both suffer from the same blight. So if one gets it, it'll spread to the other. So don't plant your tomatoes anywhere near your potatoes. Peas, lettuce, onions. So your lettuce and your spring onions, if you like, I would use lettuce often as a filler crop. So if you have gaps in your drills, let's say where the onions are, so you plant your onions now and you leave, let's say, foot and a half between each row of onions. Well, they're not going to be ready to harvest until much, much later in the year. But the lettuce, you could sow lettuce in between those onions, so you're getting much more, you're using the space much better. That lettuce will be ready to use in about 8 weeks, 6 or 8 weeks, from seed to the plate, if you like. So you probably nearly get 2 crops of lettuce in between the onions at the same while you're all at the same time. Spring onions could also be planted in with the lettuce. Peas would be climbing, so you're going to need to support the peas wherever you plant them. You could even try growing them in pots as well inside in the tunnel. Do keep things well watered. The most important thing to bear in mind there is crop rotation, if you like, Susan. So what that means is to prevent the build-up of any disease or pest in one area, such as potato blight, as I mentioned it, you don't grow potatoes in the same area each year because it'll just lead to a build-up of blight in the soil, or eelworms, or any of these things which affect potatoes. So if you grow potatoes in this area year 1, second area year 2, year 3 and year 4, moving it each time so that by year 5 you're back to the first area. And the same with your peas and your brassicas then as well, your cabbages and cauliflowers, etc. They go into an area. You've got your peas and your other legumes, and then you have your salad crops which can be interspersed in between them. And then you've got your onions and your alliums, your garlic, etc. So they're your different groups, and you just alternate the spacing, rotate the spacing, crop rotation. It's the best thing you can do in terms of pest and disease control for growing fruit and veg, just as applicable inside in a polytunnel as it is outside. So hopefully that touches on an answer, Susan, but as I say, there's a lot of information out there on this one. Then I have Jamie. The tuberous begonia and lily I potted up almost a month ago are not showing any growth yet. They're in a potting shed that has a perspex roof, and I've laid plastic over them to keep them warm and moist. Is slow growth to be expected? Well, yes and no, Jamie. It does depend what part of the country you're in terms of temperature at the moment, because temperatures have been quite low. Tuberous begonias, I've not even really seen growth on mine yet, so I'm not too worried about that. The lilies, I have some lilies which are showing out now. I'm down in Cork, depending on where you are. We might be a couple of degrees warmer, so we might be just, dare I say, more advanced. Weather-wise, we might be slightly more advanced. But my lilies are probably an inch or two over the ground by now, but not much more than that. So I wouldn't worry too yet. I probably would take they're in a potting shed with a perspex roof. I'd probably take the plastic off them now at this stage and just let the sunlight through the perspex roof at them. I expect, Jamie, once the magic does start and once we see things bursting through the soil, it happens in front of our eyes. We're all kind of waiting now, staring, waiting for things to come. But I would say you're safe enough, Jamie. Give it another week or two. Keep me posted. If they come on, brilliant, send us in a photograph. But if they don't, come back to me. We'll see if we can shed any more light on it. Then I have a question from Kate. Hi, Peter. Any advice for planting tulip bulbs now? Well, Kate, the advice is it's the wrong time of the year, but give it a go. So the best advice for tulip bulbs is plant them in the winter time. They're sold, if you like, as an autumn planting, but I actually think tulips are much better planted that bit later. I in fact often don't plant my tulips until January. Now we're in April. I think that might be a bit too late, but better late than never. So if you have tulip bulbs, Kate, and if you haven't planted them, I'll absolutely plant them now, because they won't really survive properly to be planted in the autumn, winter this year for next year. So plant them now. They may not come to much this spring, summer. They probably won't, but they may give a few blooms, but they will certainly come in future years as normal, if you like. If you have them, if they're still firm to the touch, plant away now. If they're soft or squashy, I'm afraid they're no good, throw them out. But if they're still firm to the touch, plant them. As I said earlier, a good rule of thumb is about twice the height of the bulb under the ground, depending on which tulip you have. That'll determine how deep you plant it. And plant them, see what they do, and then hopefully for next year onwards they should be okay. But I would normally plant them around December, January. Now, a question from Grania. Hi, Peter. Planning on putting in a rockery on a downward slope. Just wondering if you recommend using a weed membrane or not. We aren't using a bark mulch as our site is exposed and windy, so we'll probably be using stone in between the plants. Well, Grania, the answer to your question is quite simply no, I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend any of those plastic, woven fabric plastic weed blocks, because they're just that, they're plastic. It'll poison the soil. And what I always find using those plastic weed blocks is that the soil gets very compacted underneath, because the earthworms and that which are in the soil, which we owe so much to, the earthworms are constantly doing their thing. They're aerating, they're ploughing, they're moving up, they're coming up to the soil surface, they're getting that magic humus and digesting it. And we might just think of them as creepy crawlies and grubs, but they're doing all the work in the soil to keep it aerated. And if we put down this plastic weed block, they hit plastic. They can't do their job. They go elsewhere. As a result, the soil gets very, very compacted. Did you know, actually, and on an aside, that Charles Darwin reckons that us humans owe more to earthworms in terms of evolution than any other creature? Fascinating creatures. But when we put down the plastic, we're interfering with all that, and they go elsewhere. The soil gets very compacted, and plants don't end up doing that well. So I wouldn't use the fabric. Now, there is a biodegradable weed block that you can get. There's one, it's made of compressed hemp and flax leaves. Now that's a fine weed block to use because the worms will feed away on that and it'll biodegrade over time anyway. You might say, well, what's the point in having it if it'll biodegrade? But if it biodegrades over a couple of years, at that time, with the gravel on top and the plants beginning to grow into each other, you should hopefully not have a need for weed control at that stage. It's only the first couple of years really that you need it. So either use a biodegradable one. You could also, in fact, get newspaper, old newspaper, not just one sheet, but 3 or 4 sheets, stick them together, or put them on the ground, wet them so they form a sodden mass. Again, the earthworms and other guys can feed on that rotting newspaper. Put your stone on top, and that will also help. So either a biodegradable weed block or no weed block and just the gravel. Now, I want to go back to another question that came in during the week, and it is from, I need the glasses, a sign of moving on, let's say, in years. Hi Peter, I recently bought mixed lupins, 6 in a pack. How many should I plant in a pot, and what's the best pot size? Thank you. So, Marestail, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, difficult enough to answer without seeing it because I'd need to see what size they were in the pack and how they were grown. So normally one lupin would grow in like a 3 or 4 litre pot. So I would say get yourself a 3 or 4 litre pot and put one plant into that from the 6-pack. If they're in a 6-pack, I'm imagining they're quite small. So it probably will be next year before they flower, not this year. So one into a 3 or 4 litre pot, and that should flower away for you next year. That's the pot size I'd go to. Okay. Another question that came in earlier was from Alice. Do peony and phlox need to be protected from the frost coming this weekend, or are they hardy enough now? They were planted at the end of February. Well, Alice, like I said earlier, they are forecasting particularly low temperatures over the next few nights, predicted to get to as low as -4 in some places over the next couple of days or evenings. On saying all that, the peony and phlox, those perennials, they're tough enough, so they should be okay. I'd be happy enough that they would be okay, excuse me. But just in case you're a bit nervous about leaving them out, because I do think that the frost will burn off quite quickly as the temperatures increase during the day, so any damage I think would be kind of superficial. A lot of plants you see can cope with the low temperatures provided it's not for any length of time. So I think they're going to be okay, but as I say, if you are a bit nervous, perhaps cover them with some horticultural fleece or even just an upturned pot on top of over the shoots of the peony and phlox, just to physically keep the frost off the foliage. But I think they're going to be okay. Summer bedding or any annuals or little vegetable seedlings, it's going to be too cold for them. But your perennials, I think you're okay. Then Kira has sent in, I need help with my aphid infestation. I tried the garlic water, the washing up liquid, bug shield. Excuse me. I can't get rid of them. They are everywhere. My alliums, pansies, hydrangeas, etc. And I think Kira sent in a few photographs. There's the hydrangea shoots. Yes, I can see the aphids all over it. So the garlic wash, which you referred to there, Kira, which is where you pulp some garlic in with the water, put some boiling water on top of it to get the garlic extract out. That normally works very, very well as a preventative. So in other words, if you drench your hydrangea or whatever plant you're growing with it, it helps. It makes the plant, you see, unpalatable to the aphids. It goes back to the old companion planting, that if you plant garlic next to a plant that's susceptible to aphid attack, way back in the years before chemical companies, when they had brilliant gardens, if you plant garlic next to something that's susceptible to aphid damage, well, the garlic keeps aphids away. It deters them. Like, aphids then are your green fly, black fly, white fly, things like that. Okay, don't be scared of the terms. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just please do say it in the comments. So by making a garlic wash, you're going that step further. You're putting the garlic onto the plant to make it unpalatable to the aphids. However, if you wait till the aphids have attacked, the garlic works much better as a preventative as it does for a cure. In this situation, what I would actually say to you is go out with scissors and just remove the worst affected shoots and throw them in the compost bin. The hydrangea will make up for it in no time, and still put on your garlic wash, or use this fellow, which I find brilliant. It's the Grazers. Now, Grazers I've spoken about before. Grazers is a range of products that they're totally environmentally sound. They're all based on calcium, right? That's it there. There's different ones for different pests. Rabbits, lily beetle, This one, which is for the cabbage whitefly, but it's also very, very effective for aphids, okay? So drenched, it's all, as I think I said to you, all based on calcium and different formulation of calcium to make the plant totally unpalatable to whatever pest they're trying to deter. In this case, as I say, it's caterpillars, butterflies and aphids. So if you drench your plants with this, now you will have to do it more than once because it does need to build up those calcium levels. But once you do it, it's magic. And the one you don't have to do, because I have a constant battle in my garden with the lily beetle, particularly this time of the year. So I use this fellow for the lily beetle. And I find I do use it more than once. But even the first time that I use it, you see the red lily beetles literally jumping off the lily. So grazers would be probably the one I would go for your aphid infestation on alliums, pansies and hydrangeas. But in the first course of action, as I say, I would just pinch out. It's unusual to see them on alliums, but that is an allium, is it? Looks a bit like agapanthus foliage. I'll take your word for it that it's an allium. But first course of action that I would always do is again just, and you could even do it there, is remove with the scissors, just remove the foliage that has the heaviest infestation of the aphid into the compost bin, and off you go. Now, question then from, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, it's Rhiannoch. Rhiannoch, how can I get rid of Marestail? And I think Rhiannoch, as I say, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, sent in a photograph. She did indeed. That's the Marestail, equisetum. It's called several things, mare's tail, horse's tail. It's you're not going to beat it, Renoch, I'm afraid. It's been around since the dinosaurs, and I think it's going to see us out as well. So we have to learn to live with these plants, stroke weeds if you want to call them that, as opposed to trying to beat them, because we're not going to win. I can see that, do I see some of that plastic weed block next to it? That's just proving the point. It laugh at anything we do. Now, I'm not going to advise you waste your time or money by putting on any chemical, any of the glyphosate chemicals are recommended. You crush the stem of it and pour it on, but you're wasting your time, you're poisoning the soil, and you're wasting your money because it's not going to work. It'll come on again. As I say, it's been here since the time of the dinosaurs. We're not going to beat it. We have to learn to work with these plants and live with them as opposed to trying to beat them. Now, what you will find is that by constantly working the soil, so you rarely see it as a problem in grass, for example, because you're constantly mowing and you're constantly doing things to the grass. It tends to really only colonize ground that isn't being worked, isn't being used. So you could also just try really planting that area of ground with other plants that could push it out, believe it or not, actually bully it out. It tends to just to colonize, as I say, fallow ground that there aren't other things growing on. So do try growing other things. It's very rich in silica, which a lot of people use the mare's tail. I don't, as you can see, but a lot of people use it because I believe it's very good for your hair. I don't know, getting it shiny, or perhaps maybe I should. Maybe it'll encourage some regrowth. But I know a lot of people use it on their hair. But in terms of horticulturally, really, you just need to kind of crowd it out with planting. But don't use your chemicals, as I say, because you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time, you're poisoning the soil. So don't. You try digging it out. If it's growing somewhere, obviously, one specific area, you can dig it out. Obviously, that's not going to cure the problem because the root system would be travelling miles. But you can dig it out of certain areas, put in fresh plants, and that'll hopefully stop it re-emerging. But as I say, it tends to just colonise fallow areas. Yvonne then has planted 2 peony roots in 2 separate pots last month. One Sarah Bernhardt and one, sorry, the phone is ringing there, guys. One Sarah Bernhardt and one Duchess de Namur. Same soil in both. The Sarah Bernhardt seems to be thriving, but the Duchess variety doesn't seem to have come above the soil at all. There's a picture. I'm presuming that's the Duchess that you sent in there, Yvonne. Okay, so the fact that one has come, I would say they will both come. I'd say it's just a bit of time. I hope you haven't buried it too deep. You can see quite clearly the eye on that photograph. It's a little pink bud just towards the top of the shoot there. So that eye, that growth eye or that bud wants to be just about an inch below the soil surface, touching the soil surface, and let it come up. But I would say that just give it a bit of time. If you did plant it a bit too deep, if it's more than an inch below the soil surface, maybe just scrape away a bit of the soil from around it and allow a bit of sunlight at it. And I would say that's going to come up soon enough, Yvonne. Now, what I want to do now, before I deal with any more of the live questions, I want to call the winner of the competition. So last week, if you remember, I said we'd do a competition where I give away some gift vouchers or gift cards for the Irish Gardener store. So I asked you all to send in pictures of your garden. It didn't have to be a recent picture, it could be any time, and it could be a close-up or a general picture. We got loads, as you can imagine, and thank you very much to all who sent in photographs. Got loads and loads of pictures, well over 100. I couldn't narrow it down to 5, which is what I said I would do. I managed to narrow it down to 8. So we put up 8 in the post earlier this week, and hopefully you'll have seen them. Before I say who won, let's take a quick look at the finalist photograph. First we have Anne Sheehan's, and this is her garden in Douglas. Gorgeous Anne, looking really, really nice. A lot of work has gone into that over the last however many years. Then Colette Smith sent in this one, which I just think is so spring-like. I think so bright and vibrant. I loved it. Colette Higgins sent me in this one. You see the Rudbeckia there in flower with the kaffir lily. Just such lovely colour, but I just think there's such a lovely atmosphere. It could only have been taken in Ireland, the sky and everything. I just think it's a lovely atmosphere to that photograph. The next one then was from, again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, it's Dorota, a lovely, lovely summer display from last year. I remember seeing this picture last year as well, actually loads of vibrancy and colour in that, thank you. The next one then was from Louise Lacey Douglas. I love the simplicity of this photograph. It's a lovely, elegant, quite a contemporary looking garden. I love the pots full of agapanthus repeated a few times down there. Just lovely clean lines. I love that picture. And the next one then was from Margaret O'Rourke, of those lovely tulips with the Japanese maple behind you. You can nearly feel the sunlight from the photograph, can't you? Really gorgeous picture from Margaret. And Ursula Barrowman Fremantle sent me in this one. It's just gorgeous, isn't it? The Japanese maple there framed by the gazebo with the flowers of the wisteria dripping. It's like picture postcard. Can't you just picture yourself sitting there with the feet up and a cup of tea or the glass of wine or whatever your fancy? I just think, imagine looking out at that every day. Really, really gorgeous. But now I want to call the winner. And the winner, who had 392 votes as of this morning, was Noel Kavanagh. So if you bear with me, and hopefully this is going to work, I'm going to call him now. I don't have, I'm not like Ryan Tubridy or Gay Byrne. I don't have a collect behind the scenes, so I'm just going to try calling him now. Right, one sec. So we'll see if this is going to work. We told all 8 of you to expect a call, so hopefully Noel will be expecting a call.
Hello?
Hello, is that Noel?
Yes, Peter.
Noel, how are you? It's Peter Dowdall here.
I just watched your tutorial there. It's absolutely wonderful.
Oh, well, great. Well, thank you very much, Noel. Noel, you'll be delighted to hear you're a winner of the €50 gift card for the Irish Gardener store today.
That's absolutely fantastic. I'm absolutely delighted with that now.
Ah, good. I'm delighted for you.
I'm actually in a shopping centre here shopping with the missus at the time. So forgive it the sounds in the background.
That's all right. Well, I won't keep you in that, Noel. I was going to ask you where you're from, but I think I can tell from your accent. Are you a Dub, Noel?
Oh, I'm from Kilnamanagh.
Ah, gorgeous. Well, your photograph was great, full of colour. I love those chrysanthemums.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Have you been spending a lot of time in the garden over the last 12 months?
I've done gardening most of my life.
Ah, good.
I'm retired now, and I'm not going to tell you what age I am, but
you only sound like a young fella. You took early retirement, Noel. Noel, I won't keep you. Get back to the shopping. Thanks a million for sending in the photograph, and congratulations, and enjoy spending it.
Thanks for everything, Peter.
Thanks, Noel.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that worked. I didn't expect. No, I thought we'd have glitches with the phone and everything, but Noel out shopping at the moment. But not a bad phone call to get. But I think the photograph was lovely, and it was just full of colour. And of course, the garden should be just that, shouldn't it? It should be colourful and inviting. And I think all the pictures that came in, I loved all of them. As I say, I was supposed to only pick 5. I couldn't just pick 5. They were all great. So thank you to everyone who sent them in. I'll run another competition just as soon as I can. And as the next couple of freebies that I get from suppliers. So any suppliers watching, send me in a few freebies and I'll give them out to the viewers. So we will run a competition as soon as I can again. Now, moving back to the live questions there, I want to see one there. I saw one there coming in from Brian. Brian planted a Foresteria Red Robin hedge 2 years ago. They all did well until a few turned orange and brittle this spring and seem to have died. I live on a hill in a semi-exposed site. Any advice on this? Brian, if you could send in a photograph, it would be brilliant. But I would think it's a very similar answer, if you like, to what I answered earlier for the Laurel hedge and the Begonia hedge. This is a fungal infection which can affect Foresteria Red Robin. And it just started to die back from the top. It's probably nothing to do with the exposure, but this is where a photograph would help, because it could also be wind damage, which would also burn that foliage. But you wouldn't expect to see you wouldn't expect to see them die completely from the wind damage. You could expect it from the fungal problem. So what I would do in this instance is, again, remove as much of the infected and dead growth as possible, drench it with some copper sulfate and feed it. Make sure you're not leaving any of that disease material around the base of the plant or on the soil, because it's just going to get back into the soil and back into the plant. So remove any disease material around the base, cut back and remove as much infected growth. And if that means removing a few entire plants, we'll do it. Drench it with the copper sulfate, mix it with water, and then feed it. And they should come good if you do that. And then I have a question from Carrie. About copper sulfate pentahydrate bluestone, do I need to add lime to the mix or just add it to water to use it as a fungicide? No, you don't add lime to the mix. Now, sorry, there could be other people who would say add lime, because I know agriculturally where you buy it like that as bluestone, they might have their own recipes, but the way I use it is no, without lime. Just mix it with water and water it on. That should be fine. And then I have a question there from May Cadigan. Is last year's nettle feed okay to use on plants this year? I found it a few weeks ago under a tree. Absolutely perfect, May. Making your own plant food from nettles is brilliant. It gives you very, very high nitrogen feed to use in your plants. And if you remember earlier when we were talking about fertilizers and different plant foods to use, something high in nitrogen is very good for good leaf growth at this time of the year. So it's also a very good thing to add to your compost bin, so because it speeds up the composting process. So if it's last year's nettle tea or nettle feed, then absolutely fine to use this year. If you don't have any, then you can make some this year. Just harvest the nettles later in the summer before they flower. Believe me, it's important that you do it before they flower, else you're just spreading the nettle seeds around the garden. Put it into what I use is one of these old potato sacks. Fill that with nettles, tie it around into a bucket, soak it with water. So you've all the debris here, the nettles stay in the bag, but all the nutrients come out into the bucket. And then you can throw what's left then into the compost bin. But yeah, last year's one will be fine to use. Then Danielle, hi there. If we put bark mulch over Chinese lantern plants to help keep the weeds down, will the plants still be able to come up through, or will they die off? Thank you. This Danielle, I think I know what you're talking about, is physalis, but when we deal with common names, with Chinese, and I'm not saying this to be a snob, but the reason we deal with Latin is because what you call Chinese lantern might be totally different to what somebody in the next town calls Chinese lantern, which might be different again to what I call Chinese lantern. So I'm guessing that you're talking about the plant called physalis, but you also have the crinodendron, which is the shrub, the Chinese lantern tree. But I'm guessing you're talking about the bedding one with the orange flowers. So presuming it is that, it is a good question to ask, because if you put it on too heavily, it might be too much for those physalis to come through. So I wouldn't put it on too heavy. I'm just going to mute the phone again, sorry. I wouldn't put it on too heavily, just about an inch of it, and hopefully it'll come up through that. But do be careful not to completely smother the plants with it, okay? And now I have another question there from Bridget. What plants would you suggest to place in a border at the bottom of an ugly retaining wall, and what could I cover the wall with? Bridget, very difficult question to answer without seeing the wall or getting a bit more information. Send me in the aspect. Does it get a lot of sun? Do you say it there? No. Does it get a lot of sun, or is it very shaded? What kind is the soil or not? But a couple of suggestions for you that I can give you anyway. So you could cover the wall with, when you're looking to cover the wall with climbers, a couple of things you need to bear in mind. So you need to look at aspect, as I say. Is it getting a lot of sun or not a lot of sun? Also, is the climbing plant self-clinging, or does it need trellis? Is it flowering? Will it lose its leaves? Will it keep its leaves? These are the things you need to bear in mind. So a couple that I would suggest to you, the best of all, I think, for flowering are the clematis. Now the clematis, not all of them, but most of them are deciduous, so they'll lose their leaves for the winter, but they're brilliant for flowering in the spring and summer. So maybe try a clematis. They're not self-clinging either. You would need trellis or wire to keep them on the wall. But maybe try a clematis and mix it with an evergreen plant. Again, something like the ivy, or a plant called cissus. So you've got the evergreen foliage through the winter, but the flowers of the clematis during the spring and summer. Or another one that it kind of ticks a lot of the boxes, provided it's getting a lot of sun. So this one won't do in a sunny area. It's a real mouthful of a name, called Tracheliospermum. Tracheliospermum jasminoides, also called the evergreen jasmine. Now it's not self-clinging, it will need support, but it's evergreen. It's summer flowering, lovely white scented flowers, and it gives good autumn colour too, which is very unusual for an evergreen. But it does want full sun. Then there are loads of other climbers you could look at, but they're the factors that you need to bear in mind: your aspect, sort of clinging, deciduous, flowering. So make your checklist first, if you like. And again, in terms of what plants to suggest, I can't really suggest because I don't know how big or wide or what size the border is, or what size. Like, you could look at little alpine plants if it's only a narrow border, like your saxifrages and campanulas. But if it's wide, and if you want shrubs to get to 1, 2, 6 foot high, maybe you could look at a couple of azaleas, again, depending on the soil type and the aspect. Hebes are a great one to put in that'll give colour. They're loved by the bees and butterflies during the summer. But a bit more information, Bridget, just on the size of it, and I'll see if I can help you then. And now I also have a question from Claire. Hi, is it too late to plant tuberous begonia bulbs now? No, Claire, not at all. So only really the time now is kind of March, April and May is the time to do it. So start them off in little pots, a bit like I was showing earlier with the lily of the valley and the irises. With the tuberous begonias, do I have any here to show you? I don't think I have. I did have last week. I did have last week, but the little tuberous begonias, they come in like, they look like little mini birds' nests, don't they? So you've got the concave and the convex side. So you planted with the concave facing the sky, so the bit that's facing down, like the belly facing down, if you like, just below the soil surface, maybe about ½ an inch under the soil surface. Start them off in a pot full of compost with the view to planting them out in a couple of weeks' time. Okay, so perfect, plenty of time left there, Claire. Then a question from Sheila. Transplanted miniature apple trees, should I take off the blossoms to promote better roots? No, Sheila, I wouldn't necessarily. You've transplanted them. So I'm wondering, sorry Sheila, no, I'm reading the question properly. I'm wondering, did you transplant them from a pot into the ground, or did you take them from one part of the garden to the other? So actually it's a very valid question, because if it's from the pot and you're just putting them from the pot into the ground, I would say no, not at all, you're fine. But if it's a question of you took them out of one part of the garden, it doesn't say when, but if you did it during January, February, which is most likely, and you put them into another part of the garden, well then it might be no harm to remove some, if not all, but some of the blossoms and some of the new growth, just so the roots can, as you say, have a chance to repair the damage caused during the move and to establish better before coming into active growth. So yes, if you've moved them, then maybe yes. Then a question from Kira. We bought an allium plant where the bulb was half planted below the soil. The top of the bulb was above the soil. So we replanted it in a big pot the same way. Is this correct? Thank you. Without knowing which allium it was, I would say yes, Kira. On saying that, most alliums that I would plant them a bit deeper. But if you got it like that, and if it was doing well, I would say you've done the right thing by continuing it. Next question then is from, let's see it there, Bridget. No, I've had that, sorry. James behind the scenes here. I think he's fallen asleep. Sorry about that. Helen, how long does the wormery liquid last when stored in plastic bottles? So wormery liquid, Helen, or also called worm tea, is that liquid that comes off, if you have a worm composter, the liquid that comes off it, it's probably the best thing you can give to the garden. It's like liquid gold. It's full of nutrients, and it's very probiotic, and it's full of antifungal properties as well. So that worm tea, if you have a worm composter, the liquid that's collected in the reservoir below, mix it with water it onto the garden. As I say, it's full of antifungal properties, full of nutrients and probiotic. It will last how long, I couldn't say for sure, but like if it's only a couple of years, if you've had it for a year or two, it'll be absolutely fine. I would imagine even in 30 years' time, it'll still be bringing benefit to the garden. But yeah, use it away, I would say. And then Sinead, what was the name of the product you suggested for a hedge again? Lost 4 trees of well-established Red Robin hedge last year. So I'm thinking from what you said, I would imagine, Sinead, it is a fungal infection, because the earlier question that I was dealing with Red Robin sounded to me like a fungal infection. So what I was suggesting was cut back any of the infected growth, remove as much of the infection as possible. Make sure you're not leaving any infected growth down around the base of the plant, because those fungal spores will just get back into the soil. Then treat it with this is what I was talking about, Sinead, it's copper sulfate. It's a broad spectrum organic fungicide. Mix it with water, drench the Red Robin and drench the soil around it with that. It'll help to control whatever fungus is causing the problem. and then give the whole hedge, if it's a hedge, or give the plants around it a tonic with the Nature Safe. Again, it's organic Irish seaweed feed, brilliant to strengthen the plants. Like I said earlier, I treat infections in plants a bit like us. First of all, remove as much of the infection as possible, treat it with the medicine, in this case the copper sulfate, and then give ourselves a tonic to feed ourselves up and keep us healthy. So copper sulfate and the Nature Safe seaweed is what I would use, Sinead. Could do one last question, I think, before we finish. Hi Peter, I cut Salvia Amistad to the ground in November. There's no sign of growth yet. Will they come back? Mary, I hate to be the bearer of bad news for you on that one. It's unlikely. I wouldn't cut Salvia Amistad. It's one of the more tender salvias. I wouldn't cut it back till the spring. By cutting, I only cut it back, and I probably wouldn't go to ground level either, just until the new growth starts. So I wouldn't really be cutting them back until about now. I'm afraid the answer I have for you is it's going to be a question of wait and see, like so much in the garden. It may come back. I can't promise you it will, though. And if you do get Amistad again, it's a really beautiful one. But I wouldn't cut it back till this time of the year, just as the new growth is starting. So I apologise to anybody whose questions I didn't get to today. This is the place to send in the questions. There's no point emailing me or sending them in Facebook Messenger, because I'm afraid they're coming in literally by the hundreds. There's over 100 a day coming in. There's not a chance I can get to see all of them, let alone answer them, because I actually have my real job to do as well. So it's not out of rudeness that I don't answer through Messenger. I just can't get to them all. That's why I'm doing this bit once a week to help with the gardening queries. But this is the place to send questions into. If I didn't get to yours this week, we'll do our best for next week. Thank you very much for tuning in. And till next week, enjoy the garden.